The dress hangs where it was placed the night before. Not carefully. Not carelessly. Just where the hand stopped moving. It is lighter than the others in the closet. Thinner. Its fabric shifts slightly when the door is opened, then settles again. The room is quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after routine has already begun elsewhere. Dishes clinking faintly in another apartment. Footsteps on the stairwell below. A radio turned on somewhere, then turned back down. She stands in front of the open closet longer than she needs to. Long enough to notice a loose thread near the hem. Long enough to remember when she last pressed it, smoothing the fabric flat, careful not to leave a crease where one didn't belong. She does not reach for it. Her hand moves instead to something darker. Heavier. More familiar. The dress remains where it is. At the time, it does not feel like a decision. Her name was Margaret O'Connell, though almost no one called her that. In Cleveland, in the early 1960s, she was Maggie. To her neighbors. To the women at church. To the man who owned the corner grocery and always asked if she needed help carrying anything home, even when she didn't. She was 37 years old in the spring of 1962. Old enough to have lived several lives without ever leaving the city. Young enough that people still spoke to her as if there were time. She lived alone in a narrow apartment on the west side, not far from the river. The building had been new once. Now it carried the quiet signs of years passing without repair, paint worn thin on the railings, doors that closed with a familiar sound, windows that stuck unless you lifted them just right. Margaret worked as a secretary for a small insurance office downtown. Nothing remarkable. A desk near the back. A typewriter that jammed if she moved too quickly. She was reliable. Careful. The kind of woman people noticed most when she was not there. Her days followed a pattern. The early bus. The same seat when it was available. Coffee poured into a cup she brought from home, because it stayed warmer that way. Lunch at her desk more often than not, papers stacked neatly to one side. She kept her handwriting small. She kept her voice level. She learned, over time, how not to draw attention to herself in ways that could not be taken back. The dress had been purchased on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. She remembered the day because it had rained, and she had walked 2 blocks out of her way to avoid a puddle that always soaked the hem of her skirt. The shop was not expensive. A narrow storefront with dresses arranged in the window by color rather than size. Margaret had passed it many times before. She had never gone in. That afternoon, she paused. Not because she needed anything. Not because she had planned to. She stepped inside because the bell rang when she pushed the door, and it felt rude to leave immediately. The woman behind the counter did not rush her. That mattered. Margaret touched the fabric before she looked at the price. It was pale blue. Not bright. Not demanding. The kind of color that changed slightly depending on the light. She imagined it worn in a different season. In a room with open windows. In a place where the air moved freely. She paid in cash. Folded the dress carefully into the paper the clerk provided. Carried it home on her lap, careful not to crush it. At the time, it felt practical enough. Something to have. Something for later. Later was a word Margaret used often. Not out loud. To herself. Later, when things were more settled. Later, when work slowed down. Later, when she had somewhere to wear it. She pressed the dress that same evening. Hung it in the closet, leaving space around it so it would not wrinkle. For a few days, she opened the door just to look at it. Not with longing. With a kind of quiet recognition. She did not tell anyone she had bought it. In 1962, Cleveland was changing in ways people spoke about without naming. Factories still ran. Men still went to work each morning with lunch pails in hand. But things were shifting. Hours shortened. Lines grew longer. The river carried a different smell than it once had. Margaret noticed these things the way she noticed most things, from the edges. In the pauses between conversations. In the way people stopped making plans too far ahead. Her own life felt steady enough. Which made it easy to believe it would remain that way. Her mother had lived in the same neighborhood for most of her life. She had died 5 years earlier, quietly, in her sleep. Margaret had inherited little besides habits: how to fold laundry, how to keep a kitchen in order, how not to ask for more than what was offered. Her father had passed even earlier. By the time Margaret was old enough to notice his absence, it already felt like something that had always been so. She had been engaged once. Years before. Long enough that it still felt relevant. Short enough that people had mostly stopped asking about it. The man had moved to another state. Found work. Married someone else. Margaret had attended the wedding. Worn something appropriate. She did not remember the dress. The first occasion for the blue dress came sooner than she expected. A letter arrived from her cousin in Akron, inviting her to a small gathering in early May. Nothing formal. Just family. A few friends. Margaret read the letter twice. Folded it carefully. Placed it on the table. She imagined herself arriving. Imagined the way the fabric would move when she walked. The way it might catch the light differently indoors. The morning of the gathering, she woke early. Opened the closet. Looked at the dress. She noticed the thread again. The one near the hem. She thought about how long it had been since she'd worn something new. Thought about how noticeable it might be. She reached for a cardigan instead. Chose a dress she had worn many times before. The blue one stayed where it was. She told herself she would wear it another time. Another time did come. A coworker's retirement dinner. A church event. A Sunday afternoon that felt different enough to justify it. Each time, something small intervened. The weather. The feeling that it was not quite right. Margaret was not someone who avoided attention because she feared it. She avoided it because she had learned how easily it could be misunderstood. The dress, unworn, began to feel like a promise she was not obligated to keep. That summer was warmer than usual. The windows in her apartment were open more often. The city carried sound farther at night. Margaret spent evenings at the kitchen table, reading or sewing small repairs for neighbors. She fixed buttons. Hemmed skirts. Took care with other people's clothes in a way she did not always take with her own. The dress remained pressed. The crease she had worked so carefully to avoid never formed. Sometimes she touched the fabric when she reached for something else. Not deliberately. Just enough to remind herself it was there. In August, her supervisor called her into his office. He spoke carefully. Used words like adjustment and restructuring. Margaret nodded. Asked the necessary questions. Packed her things at the end of the week without complaint. She did not cry until she was home. And even then, only briefly. The dress did not occur to her at all that evening. Work came again, eventually. Different office. Different hours. Less pay. Margaret adjusted. That fall, the blue dress seemed less appropriate. Too light for the season. She moved it further back in the closet to make room for heavier things. Time passed in small, unremarkable ways. Birthdays. Funerals. Sundays that felt like any other day. The dress aged without being worn. Its color unchanged. Its shape untouched. In November, Margaret received another letter. This one from a woman she had known briefly years earlier. An invitation to attend a lecture at the public library. Something about community planning. Something about women's roles. Margaret read the letter carefully. Folded it. Placed it beside the first. She stood in front of the closet that evening longer than usual. Pulled the dress forward. She held it up against herself. Looked in the mirror. She noticed how it fit her still. How it did not feel strange. The next morning, she woke with a headache. Stayed home. The dress went back into the closet. By the end of 1962, Margaret could no longer remember exactly why she had bought it. Only that it had seemed right at the time. She considered giving it away. But it felt untouched in a way that made her hesitate. She told herself she would decide later. Years passed. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Margaret's hair grayed slightly at the temples. Her routines adjusted and readjusted. The city continued to change. Buildings came down. Others rose. The dress remained. Sometimes, when she opened the closet, she forgot it was there. Other times, it caught her eye unexpectedly. It never became a symbol while it was happening. It was simply an object that stayed. In the late 1970s, Margaret moved to a smaller apartment. She packed carefully. Sorted through belongings she had not touched in years. She considered the dress again. Held it up. The fabric still felt good beneath her fingers. She folded it. Placed it in a box marked clothes. It came with her. Margaret lived into her 80s. She outlived most of the people who remembered her as a young woman. When she died, quietly, in a hospital room not far from where she had once worked, there were few possessions to sort through. The dress was found folded neatly in the back of a drawer. It had never been worn. No one knew why she had kept it. No one knew what it had meant. But it had been chosen. And it had been saved. In Cleveland, in 1962, a woman bought a dress she never wore. And the reasons for that remained with her.